Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, when was the last time you gave yourself full permission to pause? I'm not talking about just slowing down. I'm not talking about squeezing in a quick break so that you can get back to work faster. I'm talking about actually putting something down, maybe even something you love, and letting it rest so that you can rest too. For me, that moment, that pause, is happening right now. Today, I want to talk about what it looks like to press pause as a business owner. I want to talk about why it feels so uncomfortable and why it might actually be the most compassionate, strategic thing you can do for yourself and for your work. Let me start by giving you some personal context. Lately, my life has been a lot. On the personal side, we've been dealing with our flooded basement and very expensive mold remediation, which is exactly as fun and glamorous as it sounds. And on top of that, both of our dogs are aging, and they're having some really serious health concerns. That's on top of having lost our first dog, Joni, back in January. So in addition to still feeling the grief of losing her, we're now facing all of these health issues with our other two senior dogs. And it is pulling at my heart and at my energy in a really big way. And then there's professionally, right? As you know, if you listen to this podcast, I'm in the middle of a really big creative season. We're in the process of creating the next version of this podcast, and it is so exciting and it feels so right. And it's also requiring a ton of creative, energetic bandwidth. And then, of course, there's the everyday maintenance of running the business, seeing clients, networking, marketing, answering emails, keeping all of the wheels turning, all the things that we have to do. So as I've been weaving together the personal and the creative and the business, I have realized, or more accurately stated, my body has let me know that it's all becoming a little too much to handle. So this past weekend, I had to do kind of like a reckoning with myself. A hey, hold on a second, what's going on here moment. I had to take a really close look at my to-do list, and I had to ask myself, like, what is going to give? Because something here has to give, not forever, but for right now, something really has to give. So I started going through the process, and this happens for me maybe once a year, once every other year, where I really have to slow down, take an inventory, and ask myself first, what is truly most important to me right now? And second, what can I take off of my plate right now without compromising my business? So I started that process. I started asking myself, what are 3 things that feel most important to me right now, my 3 top priorities in my life at this moment in time. And after much soul searching, the 3 things that I landed on were first, obviously, taking care of my family and taking care of my health, right? Dealing with my home being completely disrupted, dealing with the health concerns with my dogs, and also, to be honest, getting some support with my own health concerns, right? I've recently learned that I spent months living and operating in a basement full of toxic mold. And I have a lot of questions about how that's impacted my body. So item number 1, take care of my family, take care of myself. Item number 2, make sure that I have plenty of energetic resources to show up fully for my private coaching clients. I have reduced the number of private clients that I'm working with right now, and that's great. But I still want to make sure that the clients I am working with, that I have the energy and the mental capacity to show up fully resourced for that work, because that is so important to me. So second thing on the list, showing up for my private clients. And the third thing is, and this one was a little bit harder to decide because there were a lot of contenders for slot number 3, but what I kept coming back to was creating the next version of this podcast. Nancy and I are deep in the process of creating the next version of this show with our podcast consultant, Jeremy, and I really want to show up fully for that process. So those are my top 3 things. That's what I landed on: taking care of my family and my health, tending to my private clients, being fully resourced for the people I'm working with right now in this moment, and making sure I have plenty of bandwidth to create the next version of this podcast. So that's what I decided what was most important. Next began the even harder process of deciding, what am I going to step away from, right? What am I giving energy to right now that I actually need to press pause on for the current moment? So that's the question that I like to ask myself when I'm going through this process. What tasks am I giving energy to right now that are not directly supporting my top priorities? For me, the answer was clear, even though I didn't like it. And the answer was creating podcast episodes for this current iteration of the podcast, writing my weekly newsletter, and being in my inbox. Also, if you don't know this about me, I might have a tiny problem with compulsive inbox checking. So I want to be totally honest. This process was really hard for me because I love creating these podcast episodes. I love writing my weekly newsletters. I don't want to stop. I do not want to press pause on those things. I actually am totally fine pressing pause on checking my email all the time, but that's a separate conversation. I love it. I don't want to stop doing it, but I also know that all of the energy I'm putting into creating episodes and writing newsletters right now is energy I'm taking away from creating the next iteration of what this show is becoming. And I'm 10 times more excited about that version of the show than I am about this version, and I do love this version. So I say that just to highlight the tension that we feel sometimes when we have to go through these processes of really understanding what is most important and where do we need to give less energy. It's not always saying I'm going to do less of the things that I don't like doing. It's often saying I have to do a little bit less of the things I love doing. But that's the honest truth. There's another part of me, too, that when I think about pausing this podcast, the newsletter, I get pretty scared, right? I feel afraid that if I step away, I will lose my creative momentum, right? If I step away for too long, you'll forget about me. You'll forget about my podcast or my newsletter. You won't be interested in what I have to say anymore. And there's also a fear that when I step away and then come back, that I'll have to start from scratch. I think that comes from that fear of losing momentum. I don't actually believe any of those things. I know in my mind and my heart that those things are not true, that I'm not going to lose momentum. Nobody who cares is going to forget about me after taking a short break. And no one is actually thinking about me that often. And of course, I'm not going to start from scratch because I'm sitting on this body of work that I've already created. But those fears, they're inside of me, and they definitely show up when I start the process of giving myself permission to pause. Okay, that's like my process. Where I landed, to be succinct, I'm going to give myself what I'm going to call a silent September. Can't pass up any opportunity for a good alliteration. I'm going to give myself a silent September. I'm going to give myself a month, at least a month, maybe longer. We'll see how it goes, where I am not creating any new content, right? I'm not recording new podcast episodes. I'm not writing new newsletters. I'm spending very minimal time in my inbox, at least for a month. Silent September. That is the pause that I'm creating for myself. And as I say it all out loud to you right now, I realize, A, it sounds like pretty logical, pretty practical. B, also not that big of a deal. But it's so challenging. It feels like such a big deal, even though when I say it and I look at it on paper, I'm like, yeah, it's totally reasonable. Like, just do it. Nobody cares. But it feels really challenging. So I want to zoom out now, and I want to talk about why this is so hard, because I know I'm not alone in this. I know from working with clients in these moments where we have to pause or take a sabbatical or just stop everything altogether because our life is being turned upside down, that anytime this happens, we get a little freaked out. Why? Why are we so freaked out? Well, first of all, there's our ever-present capitalist conditioning, right? We have been conditioned since birth that our worth is tied to our productivity. We've been taught that if we're not constantly producing, we're falling behind, right? There's no options here. It's not like there's a middle ground. In our minds, it's black or white. I'm either producing, growing, and succeeding, or I am lazy, I am falling behind, I am not accomplishing anything, I am worthless, whatever that narrative might be for you. Rest in our capitalist society is framed as laziness, or rest is framed as this luxury item that you can only earn after all of the hard work is done. But, spoiler alert, the hard work is never done. Therefore, we are never able to rest. These are lots of different thoughts and ideas and different types of conditioning that we carry in our body, and they all lead to the same end results or the same end belief, which is that pausing is not permissible. We are not allowed to pause. We are not allowed to slow down. Okay, obviously, you're listening to this podcast, so you know I don't agree with any of this capitalist conditioning, but I want to name it because none of us are immune to its impact. It lives inside of all of us in some way. Second, there's a very specific brand of scarcity thinking that belongs to entrepreneurs, right? We can call this entrepreneurial scarcity thinking. And I kind of referenced this earlier when I was telling you about some of my fears that show up. We're told as business owners that if we stop showing up, even for a really short amount of time, that we will lose everything we've built, right? People will move on. The algorithm will punish us. Our momentum will disappear. We're taught this. And sure, if I disappeared for 2 years, that might be true. But often we're talking about taking a break or a pause for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and we carry the fear in our body as if a break, a rest, a pause will destroy everything. And I just really don't think that's true. There's also another layer here of creative fear, and it's this fear we carry that if we step away from our work, the inspiration will stop flowing. If we step away from creating whatever it is we're here to create, we'll lose our spark and we'll never be able to catch back up with where we left off. I just think that's worth some really gentle interrogation. Is that actually true? Is that actually how creativity works? I don't think so. But I'll save more on that for another episode. All right, so those are all the reasons I think that we struggle to give ourselves permission to pause in moments like this when life has become just a little bit too much. And in all of my thinking and sifting through these questions and these needs, I keep coming back to one core truth. And it's that pausing is not abandonment. Pausing is nourishment. My conditioning makes me think that when I need to pause, when I need to take a break, that I am abandoning my vision, I'm abandoning my business, I'm abandoning my clients, and I don't want to be a person who abandons people or abandons things that I care about, so I better not do it. No, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to choose to decondition that out of my system. And instead, I'm going to relax into the reframe that pausing is a form of nourishment. Right? We need space to rest, recalibrate, let new ideas flutter to the surface. And I believe that when we give ourselves permission to pause, we aren't just stepping away because we're lazy or undisciplined or we don't care. We're stepping away, we're pausing because we're actively creating the conditions for our next chapter to emerge even stronger than the last. When I choose to pause, I am choosing to create a space, a container where I can nourish myself and my ideas so that I can live my deeply rested, best, most beautiful life. And so I have the capacity, the bandwidth, the creative inspiration to come forward and do more good work in the world, which is the desire that motivates me personally to be a business owner. So if you're still listening and you're thinking, yeah, I could use a pause too. I would really like to do that for myself. I want to give you a few ideas to help get you started on that process. Let's start with some reflection questions. As always, what are the questions you can ask yourself to help determine what kind of pause you need and how you should go about giving yourself that gift? The first question, where in my life or business do I feel stretched too thin right now? Think about it. Write it down. Second question, what could I set down just for now to create some breathing room? You might go through that process if it feels right to you of naming your priorities and then naming what you're giving time, energy, attention to that really are not in service of those priorities. Those are the things that you can set down just for now to create some breathing room. Question 3, when you think about pausing, what fears come up? And what might be possible if you trusted yourself enough to take a break? Those are the reflection questions. Next, I want to move into a few practical steps that I think will help Well, they help me at least, and I think they might help you too, create some structure and some expectations around the pause. And the first practical step is to create a really clear time frame for your pause, something that feels doable, right? Everything feels easier when it has a container, when it has some structure, some expectations. And I think stepping away from our businesses entirely, as by taking a sabbatical, or if it's pausing specific projects that you're working on like I'm doing, knowing how long I'm planning on doing that makes it feel a lot more doable, a lot safer. So ask yourself, how much time can you give to this pause? Make it realistic, make it reasonable, right? Yeah, sure, I'd love to take a pause for a whole year, but that's not realistic. But 4 to 6 weeks, totally realistic. So I'm going to start there. Choose a clear time frame for your pause. Then communicate it to the people who need to know, your clients, your team, your audience, your family. Who needs to know that you're pausing? Tell them what you're going to be pausing, tell them how long you're going to be pausing for, and let them know how they can best support you during this pause. Usually when people hear that we're taking a break, they want to support us. They really do. So ask yourself, how can the people who care about me, who care about my work, how can they support me during this time, and share that with them? Next, I want to give you this pro tip to be mindful about protecting your time by intentionally not filling it with other forms of work. This is really hard for me personally. I literally earlier today told Nancy, oh, hey, in September, I want to do this thing. And I told her about the thing. And she was like, hey, super cool idea. But reminder, you are taking a silent September. And I was like, oh my God, I haven't even recorded this podcast episode yet. And I already forgot. So we have to be sure that we are giving ourselves space to actually rest and create in the ways that feel light and playful and aligned with the priorities that we have for ourselves during our pause periods. Right? We need to make sure that the time during the pause is truly dedicated to our priorities and that other life things, exciting life things, or things that feel like obligations don't sneak in and fill up all the space. And finally, I want to invite you to treat this pause like an experiment, right? Be really curious about what you learn, what you discover during this time, what happens during this time. And as you go through the pause, notice what is shifting for you energetically, creatively, and of course, notice what becomes clearer for you by the time you get to the end of the pause. What is clear for me at the end of the pause, and every pause I've ever taken, something has always been really clear, and it's rarely what I expected it to be. So going into it with curiosity, with a loose grip, making sure we're treating this time as an experiment is the best advice I can give you for doing this process. All right. Again, I'm taking a silent September. That's what my pause is looking like in this moment. I am taking a month to breathe, to focus on my creative work, for building what's next with this podcast. And most importantly, I'm taking lots of time to tend to my life outside of my business so that I can come back feeling grounded, feeling energized, and hopefully with a lot more to give than I feel like I have in this moment. So you won't be hearing from me here on the podcast or in your inbox for the next few weeks, at least through the month of September. Maybe a little bit longer. We'll see what unfolds. But I am already so excited to return with fresh energy, with new ideas. Oh, I can't wait to come back because I love doing this and I love being in relationship with you. So maybe if you feel like joining me in your own version of a pause for the month of September, you can send me an email and let me know. I'll be slow to respond, but I will see it and I will respond, and I will love knowing that we are doing this together. Okay, until then, take really good care of yourself. Make space for lots of luxurious deep rest. And remember that pausing is not giving up. It is truly about making room for what comes next. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Deeply Rested. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love to invite you to join the Deeply Rested weekly newsletter. You can sign up at deeplyrested.com/newsletter. I hope to meet you in my inbox very soon.